We welcome Judge Figarola, Diane Balkin, and Kathleen Wood. And Judge Figarola, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, dealing with the connection between harm to animals and harm to elders. Is there a connection between neglect of animals, neglect of elders, and should the court be aware of the relationship between the elders and their pets? In other words, what does it have to do with what we have to do when we're in court? We would like to get an idea of who's here. So if you can please pick out which of these categories best describes what you do. And we'll give it a couple minutes.
While you're filling it out, I would just note that Drake is Martha's doggy.
You can tell we're all animal lovers on this. Okay, do we have that yet? Okay, so I see we have a percentage of judicial officers, smaller attorneys, and advocates. That's great. All right. So I think that you'll find that as we go through this, there's a lot of overlapping information and that it's going to apply really to everything that we do. And what we want to do, the learning objectives in this section is going to be understanding the bond between an elder and their pet, the awareness of the significance of that, of animal neglect or cruelty and elders. And just going back a little bit, we pick bond for a particular reason because it really is a bond. It's a relationship, and the whole point is to recognize it as such, to learn what judges can do on and off the bench to safeguard elders and their pets, and what other professionals within the system can do, and to learn about resources for further education and action.
And Penny is Kathleen's kitty cat. For purposes of this presentation, I would like to note for everybody that we use the term elder. Some statutes call people the infirm or older persons. Some statutes refer to them as vulnerable adults or at-risk adults or adults with disabilities. So when we talk about these concepts relating to recognizing and protecting the elder population, it would apply to all of these groups as well. It's important for all of us to note the changing demographics of the United States population. As time marches on, medical science gets better, people exercise more, they eat healthier, and older adults will be making up a larger percent of the population. And resources regarding elders will be coming to the forefront, and we need to allocate resources to deal with elder abuse and neglect, the care and welfare of elders, and resources to keep them in their homes, and also resources to keep them safe if they happen to transition from home to a different living environment. I think Judge Figarola shared with me early on in discussions that dealing with elders, it's really a little bit more problematic than dealing with children, because we really don't know as much about about the elders as we do know about children. And they're harder because they are larger in stature and they have different needs, and sometimes they can develop dementia or be combative. So we have to deal with a host of issues related to elders as they become less competent and able to take care of themselves. So if you just look right now, elders are 17% of the population, and by 2060, they will be 23% of the population. So it's all about being proactive, plan now. When we talk about the link, it really has multiple dimensions. This photograph kind of captures multiple generations as well as a pet. So we need to understand the relationships within a family and with a family and the community.
Right, so what we're talking about is the elder and their pet, and then among the generations in a family, because we're dealing in a holistic way of how elders are living their lives with their companion animals, between inhumane treatment of animals and inhumane treatment of the elders, among the agencies and individuals concerned about the welfare of the elders. so that all aspects of the intersection of this elder and their companion in all parts of the lives, and about equal justice for all involved. So we really want to take a very holistic view of how these situations intersect with our systems.
And it's really important to recognize how much all of this overlaps with everything with each other. We were going to talk momentarily about the veterinarians embrace a concept called One Health, which embraces the welfare of the planet, animals, and humans. We also refer to this, quite frankly, when we talk about the bond between the elder and their pet, is the human-animal bond, which we will also talk about momentarily. This is from the National Link Coalition website, and thanks to Phil Arco, who's listening today and who's really a wonderful source, resource and source of information, and has helped us with even today's presentation. What we need to know and recognize is that when animals are abused, people are at risk. When people are abused, animals are at risk. So there's this intersection between animal cruelty, elder abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence, and we can't extricate one from the other. We are learning that multiple government agencies might respond to the same house coming from different angles. They might respond on a animal neglect or abuse or a barking dog. They might respond on child abuse, or there might be screaming for domestic violence. And sometimes we just don't pay enough attention to whether or not there's an elder that needs to be recognized in this equation. There's also a link, honestly, between violence in this interpersonal context and other criminal conduct. The original domestic violence power and control wheel is just a wonderful resource. It shows the various types of violence, physical, sexual, using coercion, threats, using privilege, using children, sexual, using isolation. So when we look at the original domestic violence power and control wheel, it becomes readily apparent that this wheel applies to all forms of violence against humans and animals. And I want to stress with you that violence is violence is violence. And it's a huge public health concern, and judges are in a very unique position to help address violence in the community and try to reduce it and deal with the problems in society. So Phil Arco created the power and control wheel of the animal abuse and domestic violence. And if you look at it, the criteria definitely applies to animal abuse. They refuse to let the victim take the pet to the veterinarian. There's custody battles. There's blaming the victim or the pet for the cruelty, emotional abuse, including killing pets or threatening to take them away, economic abuse. So look at the power and control wheel as it applies to animal abuse. And then, interestingly enough, but not surprisingly, this power and control wheel also applies to abuse of elders, abuse in later life, which involves violence, power, control, isolation, emotional threats, privilege, and so forth. So bear in mind, violence is violence is violence, and don't let the elders be a forgotten part of this equation.
And Diane, if I could just add just a little thing that, because
Absolutely.
I have a lot of investigators, I'm sure that this is really going to be nothing surprising to a lot of the folks that I see that we have here, because I'm sure that going into some of these homes, whether you're a child protective investigator or you're a domestic violence advocate, if you're advocating for the survivor, you've probably seen acts of violence against the mother, the elderly that lives in the family, or the animals or other members. And a lot of times revealing that information leads to assistance of the family, the well-being of the family, and ultimately the animal. And it's just important to note that. And that's one of the things that we really want to stress.
Thank you. When we look at this power and control wheel, it has so many different aspects to it and so many different dynamics. And these are some of the tactics that are used by abusers against elders. Physical abuse, they hit, choke, burn, pinch, throw things, restrain. There's sexual abuse. They might sexually harm the elder during caregiving or separately from caregiving. They might force the elder to watch pornography or watch sex acts between the perpetrator and someone else. Psychological, by the way, sexual abuse could also involve sexual abuse of an animal. We don't want to ever talk about bestiality, but it is more prevalent than you can imagine, and we can't close our eyes to that either. There's psychological abuse, where they engage in behavior that set up the elder to lose. For example, they might give the elder 2 shirts to wear. The elder picks one of them, and then they chastise them for picking the wrong shirt. They can humiliate the elder in public. Emotional abuse, yelling, insulting, calling names, degrading, blaming, targeting vulnerabilities, and neglects the elder, denies access to items that they need for daily living, refuse to transport them where they want to go, deny them food, heat, care, or medication. And think about, in this area, they could refuse them to have contact with their pet. They could use the pet to exploit their vulnerabilities, because often the bond between the elder and the pet is the thing that keeps them going. And it's this unconditional love they experience from their animal pet. They can refuse to follow medical recommendation, or refuse to get them dressed, or dress them inappropriately, or refuse to launder their clothing. And it's really important to note that we have to take care to protect them against this. When they ridicule personal and cultural values and deny access to spiritual traditional events, they can refuse transportation. They can be disrespectful of cultural practices. They can ignore the elders' values when they make decisions. For example, a person that might be devoutly following a religion and does not want to eat meat on a certain night of the week, they may force them to eat meat. They use the family members by misleading the family members into the wellness of the elder, suggesting that they're doing fine when they're not, or regarding the condition of the elder or the home, because they often deny access to the family or exclude them from events. Isolation is a huge issue. They control what the elder does, who they see, what they do, and often can deny them access to telephones, computers, or mail. They use their privilege. And I think we talk about the fact often the abuser is dependent on the elder. So they are in the situation which gives them kind of a greater license to do harm. They steal their money, their possessions, they abuse powers of attorney or guardianship. And they often will speak for them at financial institutions or when they make major decisions. One of the areas we dealt with when I was in the prosecutor's office in Denver, I handled the elder abuse unit, and we did substantial training for bank employees to recognize the potential of abuse of an elder's bank account or security deposit boxes and so forth. And they can threaten the elder, threaten to leave them, threaten to commit suicide, threaten to put them in a nursing home. And this is an area where they can threaten or actually harm pets. And this would include large animals and livestock. We don't want to lose the fact that often for an elder, large animals, farmed animals might be companion animals to them and their pet animals. And there may be also the display of weapons. So we need to take great care to protect the elder and be aware of these various forms. And this is not limited to just these types of abuses. The National Link Coalition is probably one of the best resources available. There's a link to it during the resources, and we are also always eager to help you fill our ARCO. And then there's an advisory committee. There's a ton of information on elder abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, animal cruelty, and so forth.
So,
Go ahead.
No, I'm okay.
We talked earlier about the human-animal bond, and when I alluded to earlier about One Health, it's really important. We show this slide to show the involvement of the veterinary community in the wellness for humans, animals, and the environment. And this is a powerful definition of the human-animal bond: a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals that is influenced by behaviors essential to the health and well-being of both. This includes, among other things, emotional, psychological, and physical interactions of people, animals, and the environment.
So we know, and there's a growing body of research on this, but even putting all that aside, I think just by seeing the interaction of an elder with their pets, we know that there's a positive impact on physical health, reduces stress. It gives the elder someone to care about, something to care about. Generally speaking, elderly tend to or can be living very isolated away from their caregivers and their family members that are often very busy. It provides support, comfort, security. It can help an elder deal with the risk of loss. And we don't want to overlook the fact that there's this growing body of research on the use of therapy pets in nursing homes and other facilities where elders are. And I want to stress that sometimes it's not just even the therapy pet that helps comfort the elder, but that there is the growing use of pets to help people either stabilize diabetic ups and downs or epilepsy. So we know that pets influence the lives of elders in very positive ways. And we also know that the animal neglect, if we go to the next slide, can be an indicator of the deteriorating of condition of an elder, right? So generalized failure to recognize, it can give us a sense of the generalized failure to recognize or accept deteriorating conditions in the elder. Maybe they have more animals than they can handle at this point. It can signal concerns for the ability of the elder to self-care, how the house is being kept, how the finances are being done, memory loss, is the elder isolated and perhaps not taking the animal to the vet, transportation limitations, social isolation, and obviously the animal hoarding, which can give us an indication of issues for our elders.
And I'm a little out of order here. Anyway, let me back up a little bit. I think it's really important that there are markers that child welfare advocates could recognize if they go to the home regarding animals and the elders and domestic violence. And all of those combinations, the reverse is true. Often law enforcement are called to the home because of animal neglect, only to find that there's an at-risk elder in the home. And we need to pay attention to this and try to give them the support they need. I also remind myself that one day I will be in that population. One thing we are learning is that to make a better, safer community, we need to recognize the importance of cross-training and cross-reporting. For many years now, we have had mandatory reporting of child abuse, but we haven't had much cause for mandatory reporting of elder abuse. And one example is in the state of Colorado, we did enact a law that went into effect, I believe, in 2016, I'm not positive, where there's mandatory reporting of abuse and exploitation of at-risk elders. So it mandates a person who observes the abuse or exploitation of an at-risk elder who has reasonable cause to believe that an at-risk elder has been abused or has been exploited or is in imminent risk of abuse or exploitation shall report such fact to a law enforcement agency not more than 24 hours after making the observation or discovery. And so it's interesting because you could see how animal neglect or animal cruelty or threats against an animal would fall under this definition, even though it's not specifically laid out. It clearly could be used as the basis of reporting elder abuse. And this is a picture of my dog, Maverick. So when we talk about the importance of paying attention to elders, adult protection service caseworkers encounter animal welfare issues all of the time. They see multiple forms of family violence and neglect. This is why it's really important as well for judges to partner with and make sure that they are engaging in collaboration with adult protection services, animal protection services, and child welfare. More than 1/3 of animal protection services workers reported that their clients' pets were threatened, injured, killed, or denied care. A third, that's quite a substantial percentage. Nearly half of the surveyed caseworkers reported seeing intentional animal abuse or neglect when visiting clients, and it's unknown whether they took action or didn't take action. 3/4 reported that the client's concerns for their pets affected their decision to accept interventions or other services. And 92% of caseworkers reported they encountered animal neglect coexisting with their clients' inability to care for themselves. So it's really important to pay attention to animals in the home for a variety of reasons. Why did that happen? That was weird. And one caseworker's account was, her decision to go to the hospital depended on what happened to her cat. Her recovery depended on the cat's well-being, so I had to find someone to care for the cat. I never thought that animal welfare would be a part of my job. This is a scenario that could very well appear in your courtroom, and you may well have to make decisions about the welfare of an animal to ensure the welfare of the elder.
So what are the issues for judges and protection caseworkers or advocates that are out on the field? So we have pet neglect. They could forget to feed the animal, overfeed the animal. They don't let the pets outside, little or no veterinary care. Self-neglect, the elder forgoes food, hospital, long-term health care, and poor nutrition. And I will tell you that in speaking to investigators down here in my jurisdiction, they told me that the vast amount of cases that they will go into for self-neglect, they often find that the animal is in better condition than the elder, which kind of tells you something about the bond that exists and how open they can be and how vulnerable the elder can be if anything happens to their pets. So this brings up attachment and pet loss. It could be their only companion, their source of exercise to get out, the way they go out, and if they walk the pet, how they socialize with others, a link to loved ones. It can offer a bond to others that they love. And another issue is the potential safety hazards to a caseworker, whether it's that the animal is overly aggressive, whether there's rodents or the effect of unclean conditions. It's not uncommon, as some of you may know, to walk into one of these situations and the smell, depending on the degree of neglect, of self-neglect, can be overwhelming. And then, of course, there's the issue of animal hoarding. So these are just some of the issues that we're confronted with.
When we were putting together this presentation, we thought that we would be remiss if we didn't include a little bit about animal hoarding and why it's such a great concern. And I would just let you know that be sure to tune into the webinar on animal hoarding on November 16th. So this is just kind of one brief introduction to you about the significance of animal hoarding and elder abuse or elder neglect. Animal hoarding affects tens of thousands of animals each year, subjecting them to prolonged pain and suffering. And more animals die in the homes or facilities where there's hoarding than for intentional neglect and abuse. Animal hoarding frequently endangers the health, safety, and life of the hoarder, as well as children and dependent adults who must live under the same conditions. Because think about it, there's uncontrolled breeding, more and more animals, there are upper respiratory illnesses, there are intestinal illnesses, overflowing litter boxes, there's always a buildup of urine and feces, which is not healthy at all for anyone, and particularly a compromised elder or any other person with a health condition. There's an extremely high recidivism rate, some even quote it to be 100%. A significant number of hoarders are females, and females that are over 60 years old. And this isn't true with other forms of animal cruelty, where it tends to be males. And the hoarder doesn't act on or realize the deteriorating conditions for themselves or the animal. So we really do need to intervene. And I'm so glad you're going to have a presentation on this, because large-scale seizures and rescues in hoarding situations is one of the foremost challenges for animal protection. Exploiting the human-animal bond. What happens? How does this take place? What is this correlation between animal abuse and elder abuse and domestic violence? for that matter, animals can be threatened, tortured, killed, or denied care. Animals can be used as an instrument for power and control, or maybe used as tools of financial exploitation or extortion. If you don't give me $500, I'm going to kill Fluffy. If you don't do what I tell you to do, I am not going to feed Fluffy at all. The perpetrator's actions can be selfish, retaliatory, or based on the frustration of caregiving. Think about it. Sometimes there are scenarios where I alluded to earlier where the abuser is dependent on the elder, and it might be a child or a common caregiver or a relative. They just become so increasingly frustrated and fed up of taking care of the elder and the pet that they can become extremely frustrated. And sometimes there's even jealousy over the service animal or pet animal or emotional support animal. There are a number of cases of animal cruelty and elder abuse where a child will harm or kill the mother or father's pet because they say, mother loved the pet more than she loved me. These are just some snippets of examples of cases of the connection between elder abuse and animal cruelty. There's many examples of this, as you can imagine. So one, Ojai woman held in felony elder abuse and misdemeanor animal abuse case. 65-year-old woman arrested for abuse and neglect of her 96-year-old father and 74-year-old sister. She also neglected dogs, rabbits, a cat, and a parrot. She additionally tried to tame over 700 wild rats that were running loose in the In this case, the investigation was initiated by Adult Protective Services seeking to check the well-being of her father. There was an open case, and they had been, she had been reported before. Rhode Island man charged with using cat to extort his mother. 47-year-old extorted more than $20,000 from his elderly mother by threatening to kidnap her beloved pet for over a year, and she kicked him out of the home for allegedly abusing her. This isn't just a family cat, the cat's her companion. During the year, he kidnapped the cat once, made threats on a weekly basis, and extorted $20,000 from her. Oops, sorry. A man is charged in Hawaii with killing his mother and her dog. He appeared in court. He killed a 74-year-old mother and her dog with a knife. She reported her son missing about a month prior. And according to reports, they had a very, very close relationship, but he had substantial mental health issues. And the last story we will profile today is an elderly man's wife arrested facing charges of cruelty to the infirm. This is Louisiana, so think about it. This is the term they use, cruelty to the infirm. This was initiated by a neighbor calling 911 because he kept hearing noises from next door. He knew a 91-year-old man lived there and had a 60-year-old wife who claimed to be running a breeding facility, although he never saw anybody go there to purchase any pets. He saw her shooting dogs and burying them and throwing them in a ditch. The police responded. The husband was transported to the hospital, and over 50 dogs were seized. So you can see this joint abuse and neglect of both elders and pets.
So what situations might a judge or a case manager, investigator see these types of neglect? And we brought these out because, as you can see from the facts and the little snippets that Diane put up, they are facts that if you really think about it, they could transcend all different types of places where a family or situation intersects with the judicial system, right? Because you can either have cases where you might have a guardianship case because the elderly man is infirm, and it can be linked with mental health issues. It can be linked with domestic violence issues, or there could be probate issues. One of the things that really impressed me when I started in this work, I was doing dependency work for quite some time, and I was struck by the fact that Diane presented one of these slides, and it was a little boy that was charged that there had been a call because of an animal being abused. And the child was doing something very unpleasant to the puppy. When they went in, they found out that the family had been part of the child welfare system for several years and was actually receiving services. So many times these types of cases intersect in different divisions, and so very often we're siloed into thinking in a certain way, when in truth of fact, whether it's environmental issue, a licensing issue, some sort of administrative capacity, you're trying to get a domestic violence injunction, but so many times these issues with the animals can give you an insight or a snapshot into what's happening with the family members that are being involved.
And I would just add that when we included this environmental piece, is that sometimes these cases, particularly hoarding cases, are initiated by neighborhood services, you know, because of a nuisance.
Right. Or they could also be here in South Florida. We have animal fighting. It could be like come up in the essence of a licensing or some sort of violation because of the animals, violations of the use of the land. And then you could get into some of these other issues. So absolutely, it comes up in all these aspects. So against this backdrop, obviously, we're in COVID, and we all know the vulnerabilities of our elderly with regards to COVID, the vulnerabilities they have with regards to isolation, and just the vulnerability to the pandemic itself. Sorry, I lost one. We see increased difficulties in investigating cases here. We have family members and others that at times use the COVID as an excuse as to not to let investigators or other people looking into these issues for the elderly see the elderly folks. We have less eyes on our elderly, right? Because some of the facilities are closed. They're not seeing doctors in person. There's a lot of teledoctoring going on. So that's less eyes on the elderly. The elderly are more isolated from family members. There's experiencing and difficulties in placing elderly, either because of reduced capacity as facilities try to make waive and adjustments to considerations of COVID, and then you have them being warehoused in perhaps hospitals when you had a temporary movement, and then you want to have them placed. The facilities don't want to take them. The elderly stuck in the hospital, further isolating and causing emotional problems for the elderly. And you also have the added stress from caregivers that that whether they want to or not may feel the stress from the COVID, right? Because everybody's experiencing all these challenges. And that increases the risk on the elderlies. Not to say the fact that there aren't that many eyes on the elderly and that perhaps family members meaning well are not seeing their elderly folks as often as possible, leaves them open to other people that like to take the opportunity then to wreak havoc on the elderly. So we have seen an increase in abuse and neglect of the elderly and their pets as humans are under greater stress. Pets are also threatened. Diane gave you the slide about how the interrelationship between the threat on the animal and the pet. Pets are used to manipulate and control the elderly victims. Everyone feels a little bit overwhelmed these days, and there's a lot of financial risk. And so the elders are put at risk in order to stay with their pets. I know that I had a case where, or I knew of a case where the elder would not be placed absent her parent. And that's another thing we want to stress. Sometimes it's not just a dog or a cat. In this case, she had had this parrot for 20 years. Ultimately, that creates its own kind of stresses and challenges. And then, of course, we have not just the fact that we have the challenges of COVID, the financial stress and all that that's brought into our communities, but we've also been plagued with a lot of natural disasters, right? Depending on where you live, there's either been a higher increase and intensity of hurricanes, floodings, fires, and that's also placing a lot of challenges, not only because of the physical ramifications of these challenges, but also because of the financial issues that this brings to the forefront. So there is a ripple effect of these stay-at-home and social distancing mandates, the same way that we see it affecting issues with children, child abuse, domestic violence. It's documented. It's absolutely affecting our elderly as well.
Yeah, Judge Figarola, if I could add, think about it in the early days, or depending on where you live, for a period of time, you couldn't visit anybody in a hospital, whether they were elder or not an elder, and people were passing away without family members being by their side. We have social distancing where I have a number of peers who don't feel like they can visit their elder parents. So it's less because of social distancing. If I go there, am I going to make them sick and give them COVID? So this will also contribute to fewer visits and fewer eyes on what's going on. And it's also frustrating and clinically depressing to the elder to be isolated and not have the normal family visits. And that's what makes the presence of a pet so important, or the absence of a pet noteworthy.
Right. And how does that affect to then, unfortunately, the ability of someone to use a pet, or the elderly's love of a pet to reach the goal that they may want that's not really in the best interest of our elderly? So what's the role of judges and other professionals when it comes to protecting the elders and their pets? And obviously there's some on the bench, and I want to stress that I understand that depending on the division, that if you're one of the judges that you're sitting in is going to have some limitations as to the kinds of things that you can ask, right? If you're in criminal division, you may not be able to ask as many questions as if you're in a guardianship division or the probate division as I am, or when I was sitting in the child abuse, and if there's a grandparent around and I want to know what's going on. But you can consider, to the degree that you can, to ask about the pets. Are there pets? What's happening with the pet? Who feeds the pet? Where's the food held? What conditions are the pets things kept in? Consider the elder safety and the pet safety. Include the pets in protection orders, right? For an elderly, when you have those cases, because we've had an increase in financial exploitation and things of that nature down here. So is there a pet? Can I ask about the pet? If the elderly has a pet, did I include the pet in the exploitation order? Can I find a placement for the elderly that might include a pet? And if he has several or she has several pets, can I include at least some of them? And are there resources and referrals that I might have available on the bench that I can give to the litigants or the other people that are in front of me? So it's the same thing, because I know I mean, I don't want to, but all of these issues are the kinds of questions we can be asking, right? Are there animals in the home? Can you afford to take care of them? Who takes care of the animal? It gives you a sense of a snapshot into the life of the elderly person, into the dynamics of the family. Are there regular veterinary visits? Are you worried about the pet safety? Are you worried about his health? Has anyone ever threatened or hurt you? And if these questions are asked to the elderly, sometimes out of either fear or feeling isolated, the elderly may not give you an insight as to what's happening to him or her. But if you ask these types of questions with regards to their pet, it may give you a great insight as to what's happening in the pet, to what degree the elderly is vulnerable, by asking questions about the attachment and the bond between that person and their pet.
One other thing I would add too that we forgot to put on here is that you might want to ask them if they ever get frustrated with caring for their pet, as a sign that they really, it's becoming overwhelming for them as the caregiver for the pet.
Absolutely, that's a good point. So, and of course, to the degree that we can, considering requesting a home visit is always important. Either if you're trying to keep the elderly or the vulnerable person in their home, or to get a sense of where the exposure to danger is for the person. You can sense whether there's any risk. Can you reduce those risks to maintain independence and maintain that bond between the elderly person and their pet, which is so important for them? Are there any recent health problems that you need to know about? Any injuries that the elder might have? Is there adequate water, shelter, sanitary environment for the animal, for the home? These are all things, and you can see the list of the kinds of things that give you really, because the whole point is to better the life of the elderly person, maintain their independence, and recognize the importance of that bond that they have with their pet. So these are all other considerations that you would consider when you're going to consider a home visit. And in most cases, you can do a home visit even with the COVID. And if you ask these questions, then I think that leading you to the ultimate of, do you have to force an elderly person to surrender their pet, which for all the reasons that we've talked about is such an important bond for their mental health, as well as their emotional health, and sometimes even physical health. I think that the answer to this question becomes much easier.
It's interesting that there is a federal statute that says that a disabled individual or an individual over 62 can keep a common household pet in federally assisted housing for the elderly or disabled. So they are entitled to keep a common household pet in subsidized housing. The deposit, like a rent deposit, can vary depending on the animal or the location, and it is capped at $300 and can be paid in installments. There are also certain states that have rules and regulations and statutes that allow for this in subsidized state housing, not just subsidized federal housing. It's important to know. And also, we didn't have time today to talk about emotional support animals or therapy animals or any type of an assistance animal, service animal, but that's another topic. And we have to be mindful that many of these seniors would benefit from them, and we need to recognize certain laws that benefit them in that regard. And what happens with transitioning? What happens if you have to transition the elder and or the pet from the home? What does the elder person really want? And can you, in part or in whole, abide by their requests? Does it have to be all or nothing? Judge Figarola gave a great point. If they have 4 dogs, can you let them keep one of them? This is a huge question in animal hoarding because of the recidivism rate. Should they be allowed to keep one, or will that just fuel the recidivism likelihood? Does the new residence allow pets? How will the elder transition? Who moves them? How do they get there? How do they adjust? Because, you know, for the elders, sometimes human or pet, familiarity is a key to being comfortable in day-to-day living. And when you transition them, you can throw that out of the whack for the elder or the pet. What are the expenses? Who moves them? How do you get this facilitated? How do you acclimate the pet to the new location? Is the pet at risk if you allow the pet to move with the elder? Is there some way to place it and allow visitation? Is the elder at risk with the pet at home? Can they trip over them? Can they fail to take care of them and maintain a sanitary environment? Is there support system or general future planning? Do they have a backup plan or plan B? Is there a caregiver? Is there an association? Is there a child? Is there a neighbor? And if there is a transition, don't forget to change the information on pet tags and microchips. It sounds simplistic, but if you don't write them down and don't think about them, you might overlook them.
So off the bench, this to me is the part that I get a little bit more excited about. Perhaps it's the fact that I think that as a sitting in probate and dealing with the elderly, it feels like there's a lot less that I can do on the bench just because of the nature of the inquiry than, for example, when I was in dependency, where you really get into all the nitty gritty of a family. But off the bench, there's a lot you can do. You can promote, and it's not just the judges. I think this can be done from any aspect that you are in the system, right? So you can promote collaboration among the court and animal control, animal shelters, adult protective investigations, domestic violence advocates. This is really the collaboration, as we've indicated, kind of transcends everything, because we're really talking about human behavior and how to address the intersection of animals, what they can tell us about the humans, and how we can make the existence of both animals and their companions, if you want to look at it that way, a little bit better. You can promote collaborations among courts. So if there is a family case and a dependency case, or if I have a guardianship case and I know that that this is an elderly that lives with a family, what's happening with this family? How can we promote it so that we get information about what's happening with the family and the animals as a snapshot into the the interrelationship of these folks, and a lot of interdisciplinary training. I saw one of the questions asking if there's a way that, excuse me, leave it there. If there's a way, I'm sorry, I'm getting a delivery here at home. And if there's a way that you can promote cross-disciplinary training, and absolutely there is. And remember that there is a way that this can be done in a very holistic bonding way for a community. So here in Miami, I'm sorry, that's my crew and they're getting a little bit excited. Here in Miami, what I found is that when I would take one of my dogs into court, and oftentimes he would sit underneath the bench, it was a great way of finding other people that were very passionate about dogs. So I've ended up talking to other people that are interested in it. And we have a working group that's made up of not child protective investigators, but we are going to include them, but that's going to end up, that is involved with adult protective investigators. And what I found talking to them was that they had started promoting collaborations amongst themselves. And what they found that even in these trying COVID opportunities and times, it is proving to be something that's increasing their camaraderie, their sense of enjoyment in their job, and they're actually having a very good effect on the elderly that they're dealing with. So I think that by promoting, there's a lot that we can do off the bench. If anybody wants to send me information as to some of the things that we're trying to do down here in Miami, I would be more than happy to talk about that, but there's a lot of resources.
And I would add too, on the National Link Coalition website, there's a way to start a link coalition with a multidisciplinary approach to these types of cases. So we're going to transition now to a couple of polls. Does your community have a system to provide seniors with temporary care for pets?
Give it just a couple more seconds. We'll see, you got some people still voting.
Thank you. So it's great that we tagged this, so it lets us know that many people don't know if those are available. And I'm going to talk about that in a slide or two about being proactive and starting to realize what is available. And if you don't have it, how do you create it? Our next poll in the same vein is, does your community have a protocol to find homes for pets in the event a senior can no longer care for the pet? Yes, no, or I don't know. Oh, good. So 32% do have that ability. And once again, several don't know. Thank you all for your responses. So when we talk about resources, you need to be proactive. Think in advance of what might surface. Are there pet care services for elders or those with chronic illnesses? Can you look to your humane societies or animal welfare groups or rescue groups? Or what about some government agencies or nonprofits or animal services? Who will provide these services? And what types of services are we looking for? We're looking for surrender, adoption, safe havens, foster care, maybe while somebody's in the hospital temporarily, behavior counseling. What if a dog is not being compliant and there are certain issues that can be addressed by an expert? Are there pet food banks that will provide free pet food for people that simply can't afford it? A kind of Meals on Wheels for pets. If you suspect animal abuse as you come across this, please report it. The National Link Coalition has a wonderful interactive map, and Phil has put on the resources include over 6,000 law enforcement agencies throughout the country. Let's look to veterinarians and veterinary associations. Are there available low or no cost veterinary care? Do they make house calls? Are there social workers to help the elder deal with pet grief, pet loss, or aging pets? I think it's important too, those of us that are in different professions, let lawyers and accountants know that seniors when they start preparing their wills or codicils to make allowances for the pets and what they might like to see happen to them. What about mobile groomers, pet sitters, doggy daycare to alleviate some of the pressures? And you can simply go on sign to get a lot of programs and services. There's Red Rover that can help provide grants for building of safe havens. There are charitable funds and Help a Pet that apply to animal care for low or no cost. So look at your community before you need to call upon them and make these resources available to adult protection services. One thing that we created in Denver that I'm very proud of in light of COVID is how do you keep animals in the home of people that are facing economic problems? So we have pet supply services support and temporary pet boarding that is mandated by the city of Denver, and here the proclamation, and you can access it in the resources. Again, we have the technical assistance bulletin, a great brochure put together by Humane Society of the United States and the United States Department of Health and Family Services in Madison, Wisconsin is a great resource. Here's some other resources and tools, and I know we've run out of time. So feel free to reach out to us if we can be of assistance in the future. I'll turn it back over to you, Martha or Kathleen. I know we've run out of time, but we can stay on if we can on the platform if people want questions answered.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just gonna say, if people want to hang around for just a moment, we have been getting some questions in the chat about resources for training law enforcement to cross-report elder abuse or animal cruelty. And so I was just wondering if you had any insight into that.
Kathleen, you're fading out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, but that's great.
We've been getting some questions in the chat about resources for cross-reporting or for training law enforcement to cross-report elder abuse and animal cruelty. And I was just wondering if you had any insight about that.
I think you can look to the national organizations like Animal Legal Defense Fund to start at least doing presentations. And what we really like to do is go to a venue where we have a multidisciplinary audience. So within the audience, we have representatives from different professions and vocations and government entities. And not only do you do the training, but then they can exchange information among themselves. So you can clearly look to ALD for any one of us to do, and I'm sure NCJFCJ would provide added training as well.
And could you just flip back to that resources page? Some people didn't get a chance to copy.
And by the way, they'll get a PDF of this presentation.
Okay, great.
So that will also be included within it. And I think, Elisha, did you download anything into a Google document?
Yes, every resource that you guys sent me is loaded up into the Google Drive, which is going out in their confirmation email as soon as this webinar wraps up.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. And I think I did even include that Denver document too.
And we also have a question, are any veterinarians mandatory reporters of elder abuse in any states?
In Colorado, yes, they are. I don't know, Kathleen or Phil, Arco, if you unmute, do you know how many states?
There are, by my last count, there are 11 states that have cross-reporting specifically for animal abuse, plus DC. And that's just between adult protective services and animal protection agencies.
Oh, and I just noticed a misspelling on the Colorado Link project. Colorado is misspelled, so you need to correct that, sorry.
Yeah, and so I don't know if any of those are specific to veterinarians, but that is a good question.
Oh, by the way, the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, also has an interactive map about mandatory reporting. That's very useful. I can't.
All right. Well, I don't think that we have any more questions.
Okay.
I'll turn it back over to Martha. Thank you.
Thank you to our faculty, Judge Figarola, Diane Balkin, and Kathleen Wood, for presenting the information today. And thank you all for participating. We appreciate your time and your interest in this topic. And I just wanted to give another plug for our third and last webinar in the fall series. It's scheduled for November 16th. 2020, that's in a few weeks, and the webinar will be on animal hoarding issues for family law cases. And we are very pleased to have Dr. Catherine Miller, Emily Lewis, and Kathleen Wood as our faculty, so we hope you will join you then. And at the close of today's webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete a survey. Elisha mentioned that he'll be sending you a survey to evaluate today's webinar and to help us plan for future webinars. So thank you again for everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.